All right, good afternoon, you guys. My name is Rachel Helvering. I'm the Community Engagement Manager here at the State Museum. We're so excited you're here to eat your lunch with us and hear these great speakers. I want to tell you a little bit about what we're doing today. It's in partnership with the Violins of Hope, which is a community-wide, all across Nashville. If you go to their website, you can look up other programs that are going on, and it's centered around these violins that Jewish Holocaust victims played and have been restored. So they're here in town with the Nashville Symphony, and that's what our program is collaborating with. So if you want to look up more of their information, we have red brochures up here and back here on the wall, so please feel free to grab one of those as you leave. We have two speakers for you today. Our first one is Mr. Jack May, and our second is a curator here at the State Museum named Candace. So to introduce Mr. May, we have one of our wonderful, esteemed TSM members, Dan Pomeroy.
Thank you, Rachel. I thought I might talk about Jack and the May family and all the wonderful things they've done, but that would first of all embarrass Jack, and secondly would take up all the time that we've got, so I'll dispense with that. I will mention that Jack in his 2011 book, In Alphabetical Letters, mentioned that when he looks at history and people in the past, some are moving, some are funny, some are pedestrian, and some are profound. I think that sums up history in general. I will finally note that he closes by saying that at his age, I am no longer responsible for anything I do or say. So I would like to introduce the irresponsible Jack May.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Which one? Did both of these work? And we're not getting any feedback. Okay. Just use this one. Okay. Here, take that. All right. The evil that men do live after them, the good is often interred with their bones. What's that from? And why is that appropriate today? Today is the Ides of March, and it's a day to think about some long, long history. We're going to talk about, I'm going to start this by speaking of a man named Mortimer May. He was born a Jewish guy in Höchst in Odenwald in Germany, a small town, about 5,000 people in the farm country, about 40 miles south of Frankfurt. Born in 1835, had 12 children. Two of his grandchildren might, without stretching it too much, be able to say that they're responsible for the state of Israel and the metropolitan Nashville. It's quite an astounding thing, and let me rehearse a little history with you. In about 5 minutes, give you the history of the 20th century. World War I marked the end of the great dynasties, the Habsburgs, the Hanoverians, the Windsors. They fought a war with new weapons, new machine guns, new aircraft throwing grenades out as bombs, and poison gas. And war evolved. The loser in that was the heir of Otto von Bismarck, the great Prussian. The Germans lost World War I. World War II, which really it's one war. It's only 18 years separating them, and the same characters were involved in both. The peace imposed on Germany was somewhat harsh. They were told to have a democracy. As you know, Wilson said this war will make the world safe for democracy. Well, made it safe for the democracy, but not for all people. The 20s were in Germany with gross inflation. The story is it took a wheelbarrow full of marks to go and buy one banana. And followed by the terrible inflation, which wiped out the savings of the German people, came the 30s with the Depression. And out of the Depression, which was worldwide in the 30s, arose Adolf Hitler, who'd actually been a corporal in the First War, and was only, less than that, more like 12 years after he was discharged, he became a political figure in the democracy of the Weimar Republic. Remember, Hitler was elected popularly and figured that he could unite and, if you excuse the expression, make Germany great again. He convinced the German people. One thing, if you want to unite people, you give them something they can all rally around to hate. And the Jews have been a ready instrument for somebody to scapegoat and hate through the centuries. I mean, we're right at the time of Easter and Passover, and the Jews had a tough time with Pharaoh, and then with Nebuchadnezzar in 500 BC, Cyrus. Always somebody will come to their rescue, Cyrus in that case, and eventually Romans destroyed the last synagogue in the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD, and then you go through all the European history, the pogroms of Russia, the awful auto da fe in Spain, the expulsion of the Jews in 1492. Anyway, the Jews have sort of had a lot of experience being scapegoated. You can rally people around somebody. You get a group or a person that is basically defenseless, but is enviable. And if you find somebody, and people just don't like people who are enviable. They want to, it's a very bad human emotion. And Hitler was able to say, our problems are the result of the Jews, not the great German people. And it found a popular resonance. Even our people, it frightens me when people talk about the 1%, Occupy Wall Street. These are tropes of politicians down through the ages, and nothing will unify people more than a scapegoat. Well, anyway, Hitler takes on the Jews and does it in the most brutal fashion imaginable, nothing like it in the history of the world. He not only wiped out 6 million European Jews, which was roughly half of the Jews on earth, most of the rest being in the United States, but he not only wiped them out and massacred them, he humiliated them. One of the first things he did was forbid Jewish men from going to barbershops, so they looked scraggly and dirty, and made them wear a yellow Star of David so they can be known. And as time went on, as Hitler got power in the 30s, he one night in 1937, it was Crystal Night, still known today and popularly celebrated in Europe in remembrance. Crystal Night was the night they took all the Jewish stores, shops, businesses in every city, and hooligans who took hammers and broke the glass, hence Crystal Night at night, and looted the stores or shops or doctor's offices, whatever they were, and then sent the bill to the Jewish community to have it cleaned up. I mean, that's pretty awful. Every window of a business owned by Jews rounded up the Jews, their neighbors turned them in, and not just men of service age, old people, little boys and girls, age 8, and everybody, put them into localized areas called concentration camps, and there they stood. During the 30s, leading up to as the World War II went on, 42 to 44, they actually took them to death camps. There are about 6 of them, Sobibor and Buchenwald, and They starved them, worked them to death, and until they couldn't do it anymore, which they took them to the gas chambers and killed them in gas chambers and took the bodies to the crematorium. And that's what happened to the Jews of Europe under Hitler. And it was a popular policy. Well, let me move on to the May family, which is the opposite story. It's a story of proud to relate. This man, Lazeman May, born in 1835, had 12 children. One of the middle children was named Jacob, and in the time of Bismarck, drafted the Jews into the army, gave them the dirty jobs and the most dangerous ones. Saw no future in staying in Germany, and at the age of 19, got on a boat and took a trip to the United States. It's a story that all of us have had, and their family can trace the immigrant experience into the United States. Jake May landed at Castle Garden. All you had to do to get in was prove you didn't have glaucoma and have $2. And Jake had $5 and gave the $2 to the immigration authority, and that was it. He could not speak the language. He had no friends, no family here. This was in the 1870s. I hear my father now said, I don't know what he did with that $3, but I know one thing he didn't do. He didn't buy whiskey. He got just through a circle of friends, Jewish people from his section of Germany, and went up into New England. He was always proud that he had, from the beginning, a wagon to sell his goods. Many of the peddlers had just a backpack to sell goods in the countryside. He had a wagon, and there is a wagon here of that type that the Worthen family has donated. Look at it. This was what peddlers went around and sold their wares. He went from selling from backpack to peddler to opening a store near Laconia, New Hampshire on Lake Winnipesaukee, to Nashville, Tennessee, and in just 25 years after he landed there, penniless, without language, he was the largest employer in our dear Athens of the South, Nashville, Tennessee. It's extraordinary. He learned the hosiery business in Laconia, where the great machine manufacturer, Scott and Williams, had their business, and still did up until a few years ago. I learned enough about the manufacturing of socks, brought some French-Canadian mechanics to Nashville, and you saw in a trade paper that they were bidding for the use of prison labor, and so he set up the walls inside of the penitentiary out on Charlotte, and stayed there for about 2 years, 1895 to 97, at which point the state legislature said, we're not going to have prison labor, sent him to making a license plate, and he moved the plant first to Charlotte, where the building still there was the Duckhead plant, and subsequently in about 1908 to South Nashville on Chestnut Street, which is still, the building's still there, and it's getting to be quite, in fact, it's the most expensive restaurant in town is located in the building. Bastion, I'm not kidding you, I haven't been there, I can't afford it, but he moved to Nashville with a wife. He married a Jewish girl from New York whose father worked in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, who built the Monitor. She walked across the Brooklyn Bridge the day it opened. He married the girl, brought her to Nashville. They had 3 sons in the 1890s. Mortimer was the oldest, a middle son, Abraham, and the younger son, Dan. And am I going on too long? Dan, the middle son, Abraham, died over one weekend when he was 9 years old of meningitis. My father's written about Nashville in about 500 years ago, 110 years ago, and it was really a tough city. Public health was terrible. The air was full of smog. Water was brown, and diets were terrible. People suffered from rickets. There was rampant alcoholism. He used to say alcoholism's more dangerous today because of the advent of the automobile, but Nashville downtown, right around here, there would be public drunkenness every night, people reeling down. Anyway, that's another story. So the middle child dies, and it leaves Dan and Mortimer, who lived here for a while after the death of that child. He lived at what was the Two-Lane Hotel, which is now the Downtown Y is on that location. And the family lived there. Both are boys who went to high school, went to Hume Fogg, and they're teens just prior to World War I. Mortimer, the eldest, then went back to New York, where his mother had come from, and went to Columbia. He was brilliant. He was Phi Beta Kappa at Columbia. He was historian and largely involved with languages. He had a facility with, when I knew him as an old uncle, is Mortimer's picture. He was fluent in French and German and eventually into Hebrew, but his greatest facility was with the English language. He could wax Churchillian, and I learned driving in the school hookup with him. He learned words that stayed with me today. I think of vicarious and imprimatur, things that he was a speaker. In the 30s, when all of this described horror was going on in Germany in the 30s, he became a Zionist. He thought the Jews would only survive if they had a homeland to which they could repair when they were being persecuted, and could speak up for them in the diplomatic halls of the world. He felt that in the early 30s. A woman named Golda Meir, who grew up in Milwaukee and immigrated in the 20s to Israel, to what was Palestine in those days, came to Nashville often to consult with Mortimer and raise money for Israel, which was something unheard of in the 1930s. They started an organization called the Zionist Organization of America, mostly located with big city New York Jews, but Mortimer soon became the chairman, president of the ZOA, and worked tirelessly with Israeli leadership to bring the country into existence. He, as my father said, he went to Israel, Europe and Israel 20 times more than he went to East Nashville. Now let's see, am I getting ahead of myself? My father, Dan May, his younger brother, was an amazing man too in local situation. He went to Hume Fogg, then Vanderbilt, and studied there, went to medical school for 1 year, and then went out to run the sock factory, which was by then prospering. He was the largest employer in Nashville in the first decade of the 20th century, and was so until the coming of Hercules Powder and DuPont in 1910. So it was a big, big organization, and my father, Dan, ran it. As he got later in life, he became one of the rare people. He was chairman of the school board locally, was on the board of Vanderbilt, was on the board of Fisk, and was himself a force to be reckoned with. When Metro Nashville was under consideration and Mayor Beverly Briley was under some emotional trouble, it was a time of civil rights, and he had many problems. Dan pretty much held the mayor's office together during the period we were getting into Metro. When Metro was passed, he became the first councilman at large, the largest vote getter in the first election. It was supported by both Banner and the Tennessean, which itself is an astounding thing. And for a Jewish industrialist, non-union guy to be the biggest vote getter in Nashville was just the city's honor to him for being so important in bringing us Metro, which is, I think, is fundamental in the development of the city today. At this time, Mortimer was making trips to Europe to rescue his relatives primarily. It was hard to do. You had to go through an enormous amount of red tape and bureaucracy. Jews were not particularly welcome. There was one reason for having a homeland. They were not welcome in the United States. He had to sign and guarantee that none would be a public charge, that they would all have jobs. And since the sock factory was out here in South Nashville, he could get jobs for many of them and could guarantee. But imagine a shipload of Jewish refugees came in the United States and were turned away. The question comes, how many Jews did he rescue? And the expert on that, Gene Rosamond, is here today and tells me with some authority and spent a lot of time researching this, that he saved about 50. The family legend is it was 280, but as a percentage, either way, as a percentage of 6 million Jews that were killed, it's tiny. Fortunately, we were able to rescue them. Most of them are still around town and walk among us and have made wonderful, wonderful citizens. Mortimer continued his Zionist work after World War II with the coming of the State of Israel, and when Golda became prime minister, she named a forest after him, and if you go to Israel, you can find the Mortimer May forest. So when I say that they're responsible for the state of Israel and the Metro Nashville, it's quite a stretch, but not entirely. There were two remarkable brothers. Mortimer had the time to do it because he had one advantage, Dan said, that he never had, and that was a hard-working brother. I wind this thing up. This period of history is ghastly. It's just ghastly. One thing, it was so ghastly. Hitler brought us total war in addition to other things, bombed London to death and that, and we bombed Dresden and wiped out that fine city, and Tokyo and Hiroshima. For the first time in history, civilian populations were targeted as a war effort. Now that's been 75 years ago since we've had a real total war, and I hope it's so ghastly that it's a lesson for all of us for all times. It's not the king sending off the troops to fight anymore. The king knows that his Aunt Minnie and himself are in danger. See Kim Jong-un for verification. Well, that's a quick story of the 20th century and of in Nashville and in the world. It's something that we can be proud of. Mortimer was a brilliant man, could speak, just to hear him speak is extraordinary. He was a kind and gentle person. And I would say that the lesson for all of us is that we seem pretty safe today, but ladies and gentlemen, the veneer of civilization is razor thin. And given financial collapse or war, it could happen again. And the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. And with that, is that enough, or you want me to tell a few more? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jack. That was very uplifting. It's nice to have examples like that in history that we can look upon and learn from. I would like to introduce Dr. Candace Adelson, who has a message for you, and then we're going to take some questions for Jack. I invite you to think hard and really come up with some really difficult questions for him. Candace?
Greetings, and thank you all for being here today. As most of you probably have seen, we also have a mini exhibition in the back corner there, which is related to the Violins of Hope project here in Nashville. And when we were thinking about what to do for this project, it was kind of the most logical thing, because it's a very rare object from our collection, which is related to survivors of the Holocaust. And that the violins are all about survivors of the Holocaust, in most cases, who got to Israel but didn't want to play their violins anymore. And the violins were repaired to a point where they could be played again by a violin maker in Israel. And so now they're touring the United States, and symphonies across the country are playing them. So if you can go to any of the other events where you can hear the violins, that's great. And also they'll be on view in the public library right near here, the main public library, starting next week. So my short talk is going to be about our mini exhibition and about what we know about this particular crate. As you can, oops, wrong. Okay, there we go. So it's a shipping crate, and it was donated to us in 2006 by Rodney Rosenblum, who's right here in the front. He called me up and said, I've seen this basically an estate sale. Would you like it for the museum? And I said, yes, we want it. We didn't know a lot about it when Rodney called up. We just knew that it had something to do with Holocaust survivors. It is 28.5 inches tall and 41 inches wide for those who are watching online, and the depth is 30.5 inches. So it's good size, but not huge. And when we got it, we didn't know too much, but many people have helped me do more research on it. Lynn Fleischer of the Annette Levy Jewish Archives of Nashville and Middle Tennessee has given me a lot of information. Jim Hubler, my colleague here, has also helped, and Renee White, another colleague, and also Adele Birkin have helped with the research. Oops. After World War II, each Holocaust refugee family in the displaced persons camps in Germany, Austria, and Italy received a crate this standard size when they shipped their belongings to a new home. The local chapter of the National Council of Jewish Women resettled Holocaust refugees here in Nashville. And you can see on the top of the crate the address, Refugee Committee of the National Council of Jewish Women, 3401 West End Avenue, Nashville. And then the name, Kapusta Srul, USA. The Srul Kapusta family sent this crate from the town of Schwandorf in Germany to the Nashville chapter of the National Council of Jewish Women. Note how on this side where his address is also written, Nashville is written, it's written according to German phonetics with a W instead of a V, and the misspelling of Tennessee, just according to phonetics. When the crate arrived at the museum, here's the history that the museum received with it, thanks to the help of Adele Birkin, who was about the same age as the Kapusta's daughter Anna and knew her as a child. At first, the family apparently lived in the home of the Schlongers. Mrs. Schlonger was a Holocaust survivor. The Kapustas then joined Congregation Shereth Israel on West End Avenue. And when they finally found their own apartment, they asked the Schlongers to store the crate. It remained in the Schlongers' attic after the Kapustas left Nashville for New York about 1960, and then was sold in the estate sale of Mrs. Schlonger in 2006, where Mr. Rosenblum bought it. Thus far, attempts to track the family after they left Nashville have had no results. The Tennessee State Museum would be very grateful if anyone listening to this has further information about them and how to contact them. On the other hand, we have been able to piece together some of their history up until that point. This is a story of what happened to some of those who were not as lucky as the people Mortimer May brought to Nashville before the war, but who did eventually find their way to Music City. Srul Kapusta was born in Warsaw, Poland on February 15, 1923. Srul is Yiddish for Yisrael, the Hebrew name Yisrael, or Israel in English. Srul was 21 years old when he arrived at Flossenburg concentration camp in southeast Germany on August 15, 1944. Flossenburg is, as you see from the map, this red is Flossenburg. It's 86 miles from Nuremberg, just a little bit east and north. And it's right on the Czech border. The Czech border's right here. Or what was Czechoslovakia then? Here's what it looked like. Flossenburg was a work camp which administered nearly 100 sub-camps. Up until August 1944, when Srul arrived, the percentage of Jews there was relatively low. But according to the U.S. Holocaust Museum website, between August 4th, 1944 and March 1945, about 23,000 Jews, including nearly 11,000 women, arrived in Flossenburg and its subcamps because the Allies were advancing and the SS needed to evacuate other camps in the east and west. The Holocaust Museum website says that by March 1945, nearly 53,000 prisoners were in the Flossenburg camp system, with about 14,500 in the main camp. We do not know whether Srul Kapusta stayed at Flossenburg itself or was sent to one of the smaller camps. And here, this is not his shirt, but it's a typical shirt from Flossenburg that's in the Holocaust Museum. He might have been assigned to forced labor in the local quarries or a nearby war industry plant at one of the subcamps. Here is part of another survivor's, not Srul's, testimony from one of those plants gathered by the Holocaust Research Project. Quote, "At this camp there was a factory that made bazookas. There was one SS man for every 4 prisoners. Every day 15 men died, aside from those who died from natural causes. We ran to work. Work intended for 20 people was done by 10. We worked from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. We collapsed. Many people committed suicide. In 2 weeks, 500 died." Srul may also have had more general duties, and maybe that's why he survived. We know that he later was a printer. If he already had those skills on arrival, he may have been spared the more dangerous types of quarry and munitions labor to work in the camp print shop. When the Allies' advance began to close in on Flossenburg, the SS evacuated all of its camps towards Dachau near Munich. So here's Flossenburg, here's Munich, and there's Dachau. Apparently, Srul never got as far as Dachau. Either he was one of the people left in Flossenburg or another camp because he was too sick to march, or he might also have been one of the many who escaped to the Allied lines during the forced marches. We do know, however, that after the war, Srul was living in the displaced persons transit camp at Schwandorf, which is about a third of the way south towards Munich from Flossenburg. So there's Schwandorf. The displaced persons camps were administered by the Allied authorities and the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration. This picture is not of the camp at Schwandorf, it's Landsberg, but it shows what life would be like at Schwandorf. As you see from the flag, this part of Germany was in the American sector after the war. Schwandorf had a vocational school for its inhabitants, most of whom were Polish. There, Srul might also have learned printing if he did not know that trade from before the war. It is certain, though, that at Schwandorf he married his wife Lola, who was also from Poland. We know little about Lola's history. Chances are that she too had been at Flossenburg or in one of its subcamps. They were married by January 23, 1949, as you see here from Srul's request on that date to emigrate to the United States with Lola. So here's Lola, Srul, and that's the date that they made the request. Note also that he says that he's a lithographer. Lithographs were the way most illustrations were printed at that time. When their request finally was granted, a little over 9 months later, the Kapusta family traveled south from Schwandorf to fly out of Munich. So, where? Schwandorf, where'd you go? There, down to Munich. And, of course, they had previously packed their crate before leaving Schwandorf. We find them again on a passenger list for U.S. arrival on November 1st, 1949. And it indicates that there are now 3 Kapustas: Kapusta Srul, Kapusta Lola, and Kapusta Hanna, their infant daughter. Srul and Lola were traveling with Hanna, whose name would be Americanized to Anna. What more do we know about the family's stay in Nashville? The top of the crate has only the address of the National Council of Jewish Women on West End Avenue. And here's what's on that corner at the juncture of Murphy Road now. It's totally changed now. In the 1950 and 1951 Nashville city directories, the family was living in an apartment at 1703-5 16th Avenue South, and Srul is listed as a printer. So, here's Srul with his wife Lola. He's a printer, and there's their address. This is what that address across from Belmont University looks like today. When Magnolia Avenue was created in the 1970s, a lot of apartment buildings were torn down. So we don't know what their apartment building looked like, but it may have looked a bit like this one, which has been miraculously kept from that period at 1626 16th Avenue South. So you see the front of it down here and the back, which is more visible here. Adele Birkin, however, remembered her friend Anna living in an apartment near Centennial Park on 25th Avenue North. And this is what that corner looks like tonight. This is where the Texas de Brazil restaurant is, and here's Centennial Park. And here's West End. A June 22, 1953 article by John Fetterman in the Tennessean confirms this. It's about Music City's recent Father's Day celebration at Centennial Park in breezy 90-degree weather. He says in the morning it was 98 degrees, but luckily there was a breeze. And nobody was fanning themselves. I don't know. Anyway, I'd like to quote from the article in closing. Yesterday was Father's Day all over. But the hundreds of Nashville fathers who went to Centennial Park yesterday afternoon were wiser than most. Sporting flashy gift ties, they formed a large part of a crowd of 6,500, which heard a real man-sized musical program. The pace of the Nashville Tennesseans' third Sunday concert of 1953 was set by a snappy 40-piece band under the direction of C.B. Hunt, Jr. The article then goes on to mention all of the musicians and singers who performed, and then it continues. One of the stars wasn't on the program or the stage. When Hunt swung the band into the rhythmical Die Fledermaus, plump Anna Kapusta, 3-year-old daughter of Mrs. Lola Kapusta, Park Apartments, found the tempo too tempting. Her brief, swirling moment of fame before the band shell brought shrieks of encouragement. Waller promised the crowd, a little more practice and this young ballerina will be right here on the stage. Few Holocaust refugees' crates have survived, and this one, seen only rarely until now, will be on view here through this coming Sunday, March 19th, and then will become part of the exhibits in the new Tennessee State Museum on Nashville's Bicentennial Mall, which will be opening this coming October. We hope to see you all there. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Candace. Thank you, Jack. If you guys actually want to come back up here, if anybody has any questions for them, we will take those now. And we do have one microphone in the back. And if anybody doesn't want to have to yell their question up, we will hand that to you. And we've got our first one over here. So I'm going to give you that. I know my...
Could you bring us current on the May family, your family?
None of them amount to anything. No, both Dan and Mortimer, the surviving two sons, which I discussed, had each had one son each and a daughter, and both of us have had 4 children. My 4 children now live in Nashville in various occupations, and St. Mortimer's, 3 of Mortimer's 4 live in Nashville. All have been good citizens and quite proud of them. Dan always used to say, I'll carry pictures of my children when they start carrying pictures of me. Yeah. Anyway, no, mine, here, me in the prime of senility about 15 years ago with some friends in Nashville and a wonderful wife, started a bank called the Truxton Trust, which in spite of the timing has done very well, so that's why that's a little hobby of ours, and thank you for asking. They're all just fine, quite fine. Yes, Fred, what's on your mind?
How much do you think your family's extraordinary civic involvement, community involvement, and international involvement led you to the CIA after college before you embarked on your sock manufacturing career?
Well, I had an interesting career in that organization. You notice there are no communists on Fort Negley. I don't know. We've just been fortunate. I've been lucky all my life. I've had good fortune and good health and had good education. After many of our family went east to college, got graduated from Yale in '51 in the height of the Korean War, and got involved in that. So I don't know. Thank you, George. But the family's all doing well, and out of the 8 grandchildren, 7 are still in Nashville, and the grandchildren are spread around, but mostly still pursuing education. Anything else? Did I mention Jean Rosamond's name? Did I? I did. Okay. Yeah, there she is. Any other interesting questions?
Hi.
Hey.
Sorry, it's loud. Do you keep in touch with any of the families that your uncle brought to Nashville?
Yes. Well, a lot of them. Next year I'll be 90, and everybody I know is out at Mount Olivet or in this way. Ernest Freudenthal was here. There are a number of them around town. My first cousin, Laney Cook, who's a great-looking blonde bombshell, lives over nearby me. There are a number of these people still around, but as the generations go, all these memories, and now we're just Middle Tennesseans. And all of this is a memory. So it's a very wonderful thing that we have those in Nashville who honor them. And Candace, we're grateful to you for that. And Dan Pomeroy. Anybody else want a secret of life? There's one lady here asked me how that I was doing pretty well for nearly 90, and said the secret is, folks, wear your seatbelt. Don't smoke, and be very, very careful in selecting your grandparents.
Thank you guys so much. We will have 2 lunch and learns next month. We'll have one on the 19th that's about Martin Luther King Jr., and we'll have one that's about the history of the State Museum on the 26th. So look forward to those. And please take brochures before you leave. We've got some back here, some up on the stage. Thanks so much.
Yeah, and the second brochure is about the history of Jews in Tennessee, so it's different from the red brochure.